As the clock struck midnight, David Collins, the renowned news anchor, found himself alone in the dimly lit studio. The relentless rain pounded against the windows, casting eerie shadows across the room. Little did he know that this night would mark the beginning of a nightmare he would never escape. As David prepared for his late night broadcast, the studio door creaked ominously, swinging shut with a resounding thud. His heart skipped a beat, but he attributed it to the drafty building. However, as time passed, he couldn't shake off the feeling that he was not alone. A flickering light bulb casting erratic shadows further intensified David's unease. He tried to continue with his work, presenting the news to an invisible audience. But a whispering voice seemed to seep through the walls, sending shivers down his spine. It grew louder, twisted words intertwining with his own thoughts. The temperature plummeted, and the air thickened with an otherworldly presence. David's pulse quickened as he stumbled upon a hidden compartment beneath the news desk. Inside, he discovered an ancient manuscript detailing the studio's dark history. The words painted a chilling picture. A monstrous entity, born from the studio's darkest secrets, resided within its walls. It hungered for souls and had claimed previous victims, their fates forever sealed within its sinister grasp. As David's eyes scanned the passages, he realized he had unwittingly awakened the beast. Fear gripped him, but escape seemed impossible. Doors locked, windows sealed shut. The studio became his prison. With each passing hour, the whispers grew louder, their voices echoing in his mind. Shadows danced maniacally around him, mocking his helplessness. And David's reflection in the television screen distorted, morphing into something grotesque. The monster, having fed on the fear it instilled, rose from the darkness, its eyes gleaming with malevolence. It lunged at him, razor-sharp teeth gnashing, tearing at his flesh. The pain was excruciating, indescribable. But as David's life force waned, the beast did the unthinkable. It melded with him, their souls merging into a twisted symbiosis. The monster claimed victory, seizing control of his body. The next day, David Collins returned to work. Viewers remained spellbound as the new David Collins graced their screens, delivering the news with an eerie charisma. No one suspected the darkness that lurked beneath his smile. The world watched, unknowing of the horrifying secret hidden behind the eyes of their trusted news anchor. The monster relished its newfound power, manipulating minds and shaping perceptions. An insidious puppet master pulling the strings. The night draped its inky fingers over the little girl's room, casting eerie shadows that danced upon the walls. Nestled beneath her blankets, she called out in the darkness, her voice a soft whisper that seemed to vanish into the void. "Mommy?" From the hallway emerged a figure, its silhouette framed by the dim light, filtering in from the living room. "Yes, sweetheart." came the gentle reply, a warm smile evident in the voice that washed over her like a comforting blanket. With a sense of relief, the little girl sat up in bed, her fears momentarily forgotten in the presence of her mother. Can you make me a sandwich? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Of course, darling, her mother replied, her tone soft and reassuring as she made her way to the kitchen. As the little girl listened to the sounds of her mother moving about in the kitchen, a sense of unease began to creep over her. Something didn't feel right. Something was off. But she pushed the feeling aside, chalking it up to her imagination running wild in the darkness of the night. After all, her mother's voice had always been a source of comfort to her, a beacon of light in the shadows. Minutes passed, and the little girl's stomach growled impatiently as she waited for a sandwich to be ready. But as the moments stretched on, a feeling of dread began to settle in the pit of her stomach. Finally, her mother emerged from the kitchen, a sandwich in hand, her smile warm and inviting. Here you go, sweetheart, she said, her voice filled with false sweetness as she handed the girl the sandwich. But as the little girl reached out to take it, her fingers brushed against something cold and slimy, something that sent a chill down her spine. With a growing sense of horror, she looked at her mother, her eyes widening in disbelief as she took in the gradual transformation before her. Her mother's skin began to ripple and contort, her features twisting and warping as if struggling to maintain their human form. The warm smile that had once been a source of comfort now seemed twisted and malevolent, the creature beneath revealing itself in a grotesque display of horror. Mommy? The little girl whispered, her voice trembling with fear as she recoiled in shock. But it was too late. The creature that had once been her mother lunged forward, its true form bursting forth from the confines of her flesh in a grotesque display of horror. With a scream of terror, the little girl leaped from the bed and raced for the door, her heart pounding in her chest as she fled from the monster that wore her mother's skin. As she ran through the darkened halls of her home, the little girl's mind raced with 1,000 questions, each one more terrifying than the last. How could this be happening? What was this creature that had taken her mother's form? But there was no time for answers, only the urgent need to escape, to survive. As the creature's guttural grunts and roars echoed through the house, the little girl huddled and squeezed inside the cramped confines of a cupboard, her heart pounding in her chest as she prayed for morning to come. She could hear the sounds of destruction outside, the shattering of glass, the splintering of wood as the creature wreaked havoc upon their home. Hour after agonizing hour passed, each one stretching on interminably as the little girl waited in terrified silence. But as the first faint rays of dawn began to filter through the cracks in the cupboard door, the creature's sound subsided and a sense of relief washed over her, a glimmer of hope in the darkness. With trembling hands, she pushed open the cupboard door and emerged into the dim light of the morning, her eyes wide with shock and horror at the scene before her. The walls and floors of her home were splattered with blood, the air thick with the stench of death. And there, in the bedroom, lay the lifeless body of her parents, their faces frozen in expressions of terror, their throats torn open by savage claws of the creature that had once been her mother. Tears streamed down the little girl's cheeks as she stumbled forward, her mind reeling with disbelief and horror at the unspeakable tragedy that had unfolded before her eyes. And so, when the Social Security police forces arrived to investigate the scene, the little girl could only watch in numb silence as they took her away, their accusing eyes filled with suspicion and distrust. In the days that followed, she found herself confined to a psychiatric home, surrounded by doctors and nurses who refused to believe her story, that her parents had been slain by a monstrous creature that had taken her mother's form. Alone and haunted by the memories of that fateful night, the little girl could only pray for the day when the truth would finally come to light, when the world would know the true horrors that lurked within the shadows, waiting to strike when least expected. The Bates Motel stood in eerie silence, its weather-beaten sign creaking ominously in the night breeze. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of dampness and decay, a haunting reminder of the secrets that lurked within its walls. In the depths of the motel's basement, a woman named Sarah found herself trapped in a nightmare beyond comprehension. She had stumbled upon the Bates Motel in search of shelter from a storm, unaware of the horrors that awaited her within its confines. At first, Sarah was relieved to find refuge from the tempest outside. But her relief quickly turned to dread as she discovered the truth about her host, Norman Bates, the troubled proprietor of the motel whose fractured psyche harbored a darkness beyond imagining. Norman appeared kind and polite at first, offering Sarah a warm meal and a comfortable bed for the night. But as the hours passed, Sarah began to sense something unsettling about her host, a palpable tension that hung in the air like a suffocating fog. In the dead of the night, Sarah awoke to the sound of whispered voices echoing through the corridors of the motel. Creeping out of her room, she followed the haunting melodies to the basement, where she stumbled upon a scene of unspeakable horror. Norman stood before her, clad in a tattered dress and a wig, his eyes wide with madness as he conversed with an unseen presence. A presence he referred to as Mother. "Mother, please," Norman pleaded, his voice trembling with desperation. "She's not like the others. She's special. We have to protect her." Sarah watched in horror as Norman's demeanor shifted, his gentle facade crumbling away to reveal the twisted truth beneath. It was then that she realized the full extent of her predicament. She was trapped in the lair of a madman, a prisoner to his delusions and depravity. Desperate to escape, Sarah pleaded with Norman to let her go, but her cries fell on deaf ears. He was convinced that she was his lover, his savior from the clutches of his domineering mother, a mother who existed only in his fractured mind. As the days turned into weeks, Sarah languished in captivity, her spirit broken by the relentless torment inflicted upon her by Norman and his imaginary mother. She endured unspeakable horrors at their hands, each day a living nightmare of pain and despair. But as her desperation grew, so too did her determination to break free from her prison. With every ounce of strength she possessed, Sarah plotted her escape, biding her time until the opportunity presented itself. And then, one fateful night, as Norman lay in a drug-induced slumber, Sarah made her move. With trembling hands and a racing heart, she crept through the darkness of the basement, her eyes fixed on the door that stood between her and freedom. But just as she reached for the handle, a figure emerged from the shadows. A figure clad in a tattered dress and a wig, its eyes gleaming with madness and malice. "Mother," Norman's voice hissed, his feature contorted with rage. You can't leave me. Not again. With a scream of terror, Sarah recoiled in horror as Norman lunged forward, his hands grasping at her throat with a strength born of madness. In the chaos that followed, she fought for her life, her screams echoing through the empty corridors of the Bates Motel. But in the end, it was all for naught. As the life drained from her body, Sarah's final thought was one of bitter irony, a tragic reminder of the darkness that lurked within the shadows of the Bates Motel, where madness reigned supreme and nightmares became reality. The Smith family had always cherished the quaint little house on the outskirts of town. But when the first spider appeared, a tiny harmless creature, skittering across the kitchen floor, their idyllic home began to unravel. At first they dismissed it as a mere nuisance, squashing the occasional arachnid that dared to invade their space. But as the days turned into weeks, the spiders multiplied, creeping out from dark corners and hidden crevices, their numbers growing with each passing day. It's like they're everywhere, Sarah Smith muttered, swatting at a spider that descended from the ceiling on a delicate thread of silk. Her husband Tom shared her unease, his brow furrowed with concern. I'll call an exterminator, he promised. But even he couldn't shake the feeling of dread that hung in the air like a shroud. As the infestation worsened, the Smiths found themselves besieged by a relentless horde of spiders. They scuttled across the walls, their clicking legs echoing through the empty rooms of the house, their webs stretching across every surface like a sinister tapestry. It's like they're trying to take over, their teenage daughter, Emily whispered, her voice trembling with fear. And then, on the final day, the Smiths came face to face with the true horror that lurked within their home. As they descended into the basement in search of refuge, they stumbled upon a grotesque sight. A monstrous spider, its bloated body pulsating with malevolent intent, its 8 eyes gleaming with hunger. It's the mother, Tom gasped, his voice barely a whisper as he stared into the abyss of the creature's gaze. With a sickening realization, the Smiths understood the true nature of their ordeal. The spiders that had infested their home were not mere pests. They were the spawn of a monstrous entity, a creature that had laid claim to their house and everything within it. And now, as they stood frozen in terror, the giant spider advanced, its mandibles clicking with anticipation. With nowhere to run and no hope of escape, the Smiths found themselves ensnared in a nightmare from which there could be no awakening. The giant spider descended upon them with terrifying speed, its enormous legs wrapping around them like a vice, pinning them to the cold concrete floor of the basement. Sarah screamed as the creature's fangs sank into her flesh, injecting her with a paralyzing venom that left her helpless and immobile. One by one, the Smiths were cocooned in thick, sticky webs of silk, their bodies wrapped tightly as the creature prepared its feast. They watched in horror as the giant spider injected them with digestive enzymes, slowly liquefying their insides as it fed upon their flesh. The pain was unbearable, a searing agony that consumed them from within, as they lay trapped in their silk prisons, unable to move or scream. They could only watch in helpless horror as the giant spider devoured them alive. Their muffled cries drowned out by the sounds of crunching bones and tearing flesh. In the end, the Smiths were nothing more than prey, consumed by the insatiable hunger of the mother spider and her brood. And as the last vestiges of their humanity were devoured, the house stood silent once more, a silent monument to the horrors that lurked within its walls. Samantha had dreamt of this journey for years, a voyage from LA to Hawaii. Every penny she scrimped and saved went into this adventure. Now, aboard the opulent cruise liner, she felt the thrill of anticipation tingling in her veins. Stretched before her, vast and mysterious, promising endless possibilities, in the luxurious confines of the ship, Samantha found herself drawn to Parker, a fellow traveler whose easy smile and charm melted her reservations. They shared quiet moments on the deck, the moonlight casting a romantic glow over their budding connection. But on the second night, as they leaned in for a kiss, the tranquility shattered. Parker's scream ripped through the peaceful night, his finger jabbing frantically towards the horizon. Samantha followed his gaze, her heart leaping into her throat as she beheld the monstrous sight before them. Giant waves loomed on the misty horizon, rising with ominous intent. The ship bucked and groaned as a tsunami crashed upon them, threatening to swallow them whole. Samantha clung to Parker as the world tilted, terror flooding her veins. But miraculously, the ship held steady, defying the onslaught of nature's fury. To the chaos, Samantha's eyes widened in horror as she glimpsed the true source of their peril. Rising from the churning depths, a colossal creature emerged, its grotesque form illuminated by the moonlight. Towering over them, it wielded tentacles like branches, each one capable of crushing ships like toys. The creature's massive bulk glistened with slimy, iridescent scales, its monstrous form twisting and writhing with unnatural grace. Jagged spines lined its back, casting eerie shadows across the rolling waves. Its eyes, glowing orbs of malevolent light, fixated on the hapless vessel with an insatiable hunger. Parker, caught in the grip of the creature's monstrous appendage, was hoisted into the air, his screams lost amidst the tumultuous roar of the sea. Samantha could only watch in helpless horror as the creature advanced, its massive form eclipsing the moon. With each ponderous step, the creature's titanic bulk sent shockwaves rippling through the ocean, shattering the once tranquil surface. The ship creaked and groaned under the onslaught, its steel hull no match for the creature's wrath. As the vessel splintered beneath her, Samantha clung to the remnants, her mind reeling with disbelief. The last thing she saw before the icy embrace of the ocean claimed her was the creature's malevolent gaze, fixed upon the distant shoreline. In the depths below, unseen by human eyes, ancient horrors stirred, their slumber disturbed by the awakening of their dead progeny. And as Samantha's consciousness slipped away, she knew that the nightmare had only just begun.